We're at South Trust, who's the manager, and what do you have, 5 or 6 loan officers that work with you?
6 or 7. Well, yeah, 6 or 7.
Okay.
8.
And well, anyway, good afternoon. I don't know too much about you. What I do know, I really like. I know that you're a major producer. You, in addition to managing your people, you knock out about $44 million yourself. But I also like the fact that you play polo Alabama style, which, as you said yesterday, means that you can drink and have all sorts of fun.
Party polo.
Anything on top of an animal.
What?
So that sounds like a lot of fun. So that sounds like a lot of fun and enjoyable.
To Alabama.
It was actually a great conversation. We were talking because when I went to Georgetown, the polo teams that were there were all stuffed shirts and rich kids from South America, so a little bit different. But anyway, before we actually get into the body of the interview, everybody kind of likes to know how people got in the business and kind of where you came from. And I know you're down, in Huntsville?
I'm in Huntsville, Alabama. I sure am.
Yeah. Well, how'd you get in the business?
Sure. I was born and raised in Huntsville, and I tell people I'm just an old mom. I married my husband, and we moved away for about 15 years. And when we came back home, I decided I wanted to go back to work. And so I just looked around and watched the girl that did our loan, who also had 4 children, and when I decided to come back, I talked to her and said, "You look like you're having fun. Tell me about what you do." And she told me about it, and it just sounded like the greatest job in the world. And that's how I started.
Which it can be, of course. And what year did you actually start?
1993.
Okay. So, actually, boy, you're doing a pretty nice volume here for that number of years, which kind of begs the question. I guess my first question to you is, when you started, did you do the traditional route, going after realtors? How'd you go out and develop your business?
My business is probably 90% realtor builder-based. I do the vast majority, and that is my bread and butter. I think that's my job security. I know that there are a lot of new areas that people pursue, and I think that's wonderful. Affinity groups and the banks, straight to the consumer, internet, all that is wonderful. I guess I'm just an old-fashioned girl. Just went after those realtors and builders and built those relationships.
Yeah, but for whatever interest people out there have, I would say that of the vast majority of the 60 or 70 interviews I've done, I would say the vast majority, really there is, unless you concentrate solely on builder, there is a core base of realtor business. I have interviewed maybe 3 or 4 people that have, one works entirely with attorneys, one works with stockbrokers. They're extremely successful, very unusual, and very interesting stories. But you're right, the core business is in the realtor business.
Well, I have found realtors and builders very easy to work with, oddly enough. I tell people I don't know what that says about me, but I really like them. As long as you do what you say, when you say you're going to do it, I don't think I can ever recall an instance where I have gotten into maybe not difficult situation, but any type of confrontational situation with a realtor or a builder. Even if I tell them that I'm going to call them on a certain day, I may or may not have an answer for them. As long as I call them, they're very easy to work with.
Yeah, you're right. It is a little bit odd that you would say that as a blanket statement, because realtors, a lot of them
are known for being very demanding.
Well, they can be demanding, which is fine in a professional sense. I mean, we all kind of expect that. But realtors also can be. I think part of it is that we are in a rejection business, but there's a caveat after that, and the caveat is we're in a rejection business, but it's not a personal type rejection. And when someone says no, you didn't get the loan, except in the rarest of circumstances where maybe something personal in truth, it really is because someone else had a better program, a better rate, or maybe they have an ongoing relationship. But it's not personal.
From the very beginning, John, I did try to target certain realtors. They weren't always the most high-producing. They were the ones that I thought that I could be friends with, that I could work with over a long period of time, that would not ask things of me that I couldn't deliver, that were reasonable to deal with. And I think I knew that if I approached it from that point of view, I would last a lot longer.
You know what?
I'd be a lot saner.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting, actually I think that's an interesting statement. I can only recall one other interview along those lines, and the basic advice was, if you're working with a realtor, and I know it was a Don Ehrman, and if you're working with a realtor and you find that they're difficult to work with, it is better for you to drop them and to move on to somebody else.
And what has happened to me, and I wouldn't be surprised if it happened to other people, by not going after the really big ones, eventually they came to me. And now I'm going to say the top 10%, I do maybe 80% of the business of the top 10% of the realtors in our area.
Wow.
And maybe one of those I actually pursued, and the rest we kind of found each other over time.
That's interesting. It probably says something about your personality, too, and your ability to relate. We all want to be liked, and, if you can do business and be liked at the same time, all the better. I think realtors, they're just like us. Everybody wants to work with people that are pleasant and are enjoyable.
I am constantly astounded. No matter what, technology is wonderful. It is a tremendous tool. We have automated underwriting now. I couldn't live without it. The internet, email, just all of the ways that technology makes my job easier. It is still, with all of that, it is 100% a relationship business. My relationship with my customers, my relationship with the builders, the realtors, and then my relationship with my staff here as well.
Yeah. It's funny. We talk about this a lot, but it's something that always bears worth repeating, that in all interviews that I do, there is only one common thread that winds through all 60 or 70, and that thread is the relationship one of building relationships with your clients. That's the only one that comes through.
I wouldn't even really know how to do it, and I don't think it would be very fun for me personally if these people that I worked with every day were not also my friends, because that would just be way too much time that I was spending with someone I didn't care for.
Mm-hmm. Well, when you're out there with your realtors, what do you do to foster that kind of a relationship specifically?
Well, let's see. From the beginning, I have always tried to give them something of value. So I do a newsletter once a month. Every week, I fax them a market report, what data's coming out, how it might affect the rates, that kind of thing. If the rates change, or I am very conscious of the market. I probably check it 15 times a day, and I've tried to become a source of information for realtors in terms of what the trends are, what the rates might do, both in the long term and then the short term as well. So in a general sense, I've just tried to be a source of information for them, try to help them make their job easier.
But, it's kind of funny on the timing. I just finished doing up an interview this morning with Steve Peterson, who was a top producer at Chase, does about $90 million, and now is with Partners Mortgage out in California. And that's exactly how he has done his business. He sends a financial marketing newsletter out, broadcast fax, twice a week, and he has created a niche much in the same way that you have, by building value where people look for this newsletter and rely on it. I'm talking about your market report. I'll talk about your newsletter in a minute.
Yeah. If what I have found in my area is that since I treat it as a profession, and I consider myself a professional in this, I just try to orient my marketing strategy along those same lines. And people respond to me in the same way, so that I try to pull in the more professional sphere of customers and realtors.
Oh, I'm sure you do.
That kind of thing.
That's a nice byproduct of it, isn't it?
It is.
when you do your marketing, how do you put your, as opposed to your newsletter, we'll get to that in a minute, but how do you put this economic marketing report together?
It is a service that I pay for every month.
Who do you use?
RateLink.
That's exactly what he does.
Mm-hmm. It's a wonderful newsletter.
They're out in California, right?
Mine, they must have one out there, but mine is in Virginia.
In Virginia, okay.
Anyway,
let me ask you about the second part of this, and that's your newsletter that you send out. And how about tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. That I send out to a much wider group, a greater number of people, and that is going to have information about new programs that we have, changes in Fannie and Freddie underwriting guidelines, and quite a bit of marketing/technical data. How many of the loans that we did or of the sales that we have knowledge of, this percentage was a conforming loan, these were governments, these were jumbos, these were existing homes, new construction. We just try to break it, or I try to break it down as much as I possibly can.
And where do you get most of this information that's inputted into the newsletter? And I'm saying that with a view for people who might like to do this themselves.
Sure. Most of it I get just from our system here. Now, it's quite a bit of work. I mean, we don't have the capability on this system to break it down into how many loans did we close that were existing versus new construction. So you just kind of have to be keeping track of it as you go through the month, and it makes your job at the end of the month quite a bit easier.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of hard work.
Yeah, but you know what? I think realtors and builders would appreciate something like that.
They seem to. I've gotten a lot of good feedback, I think.
It's kind of a byproduct of that by sending out the economic report and newsletter. Let me just take a stab that somebody out there who has developed some initial relationships that not only does it foster the relationship, probably you don't have to spend quite as much time out in the field.
No, I actually don't spend any time anymore out in the field, which I do not say with much pleasure because I think that's the funnest part of this whole thing. I cannot believe somebody's going to pay me to go from realtor company to realtor company talking to people.
Well, after my phone call, you won't have to worry about the money part of the equation.
That is fun to me. And so, that's, I guess, the downside of becoming somewhat successful in this field is that then you're needed in the office more and more. So I try to do it in other ways. We go to lunch. I socialize with these people a lot. I'll have a party at my house. I'll go to functions at their home. I mean, these people do become my friends, and so I end up either talking to them or seeing them a fair amount of the time. Doesn't leave a lot of time for generating new contacts, but what I have found, or in my experience, at a certain point, after years of just pounding the pavement, eventually your name will be out there as someone who does what they say they're going to do, and people will come to you. And, of course, then rates become less of an issue, too.
Right, which is kind of a nice byproduct.
No, it never goes away completely.
No, well, you always have to be competitive.
Exactly.
What I call competitive.
Exactly. You need good rates and good programs.
Yeah,
you don't necessarily have to buy the market.
Yeah, I've always thought that at least years ago, I'm not in tune with today's version of what I'm going to say, but I always thought that I used to tell the people that work for me, my branch managers, that if your people could get within either an eighth of an interest rate or a quarter point, I didn't want to hear about it. I just didn't want to hear about it. There's always, in the Washington metropolitan area, literally
always someone that's going to be lower.
Right, always someone buying the market. So if you sell,
I've never been lucky enough to be with that company that just consistently, day in and day out, had the absolute lowest rates.
Well, yeah, I have never myself been associated with them, but I can tell you a couple war stories, which I won't get in today. but the basic genesis of it is years ago there was a company out there. They're out of business. I think it was Washington Federal up in Washington, where they had like a 3-1 arm that was so under the market that literally they had people stand outside their door, and of course they're not around anymore.
Right. That is a good point when you are making a decision about where you want to work, because anyone that is successful at this is an at-will employee. We can go anywhere that we want to and know that we'll always have a job. But it is a good point. I've tried never to chase irate when I was making those decisions, because as soon as you have it, it goes away.
I think mentally it festers on itself too.
Oh, it does.
If you have loan officers that are focusing on rate all the time and bitching about rate or complaining about it, or even worse, internalizing themselves about it, it's like a cancer. You almost have to get rid of them. You can't keep them.
We have a wonderful group of loan officers here. We have been together for about 4 or 5 years, maybe longer, 5 or 6 years. And we're very good friends. We work together as a team. Rate is an issue, but it's never the focus point for us.
Sure. Yeah, and it shouldn't be. As you say, you focus on programs and value added.
Exactly. What I can add to a realtor's job, I tell realtors if they're working, I'm working. I mean, I don't come in on the weekends anymore, but I'm available to them anytime. They feel free to page me, call me, track me down. I will always help them. There's never a moment where I'm not happy to help them.
So you become, as a manager, also a resource center for them.
I try. Yeah.
I would think after that amount of time, they probably don't need you as much as they did, but it's nice knowing you're there.
That's a very good point. It is very rare anymore. Now, when I come in on Monday morning, I may have a couple messages that, they want me there and working Monday morning, but really on the weekend, it's somewhat unusual now for them to need me. Of course, I tend to work with very experienced realtors. They know what they're doing. They do their job. They do it very well. They count on me to do my job and to do it very well.
Yeah. What's kind of coming across in this is that you've developed a plan to work with realtors that suits your personality, and did this early on, and as kind of a result of that, you don't have some of the typical problems that even experienced loan officers have where, oh, God, don't tell me it's Sally at the other end of the line, because you know you're going to get jammed somewhere on something.
That's exactly right.
That takes apart, it takes some of the fun out of it.
I'm going to say probably 4 years of working 15 hours a day. I might exaggerate, but probably not, 6 days a week. And the payoff is that, and then it was exciting, it was fun, it was building. It wasn't even difficult to do at that time. I mean, I was building a career and then an office and then a branch and then a region. I mean, it was never hard to do. I was happy to put that time into it. But the payoff is now I can back off. This year I have chosen to back off of my personal production some, and as it's turned out, it really hasn't declined at all, but my orientation shifted this year to really devote myself more to the loan officers here and see what I could do to build up their business.
There's one area you haven't talked about too much, and that's builders. And perhaps you might discuss the difference in the relationship that you form with builders. They are a different animal, as we know. Let's talk about them a little bit.
Most of the builders in our area have realtors that represent them. The ones that don't... You
mean their own mortgage subs or CBAs?
No, actually just realtors. So I'm still really working with the realtors.
Oh, okay. Well, that's unusual. We don't have that up here.
We have kind of a time-lapse market, I think, here. I talked to originators from Texas and Atlanta, and they are into those controlled business arrangements and things like that, and that just simply hasn't happened yet in our market, so that may be coming on down the line.
Well, also up in the Washington area and most areas of the country, they're really are the only time that builders used to use realtors years ago, or at least those the medium to large size, where if the market was in the tank and they needed all the help they had, because they, of course, they didn't want to come pay them 3%, on that side of the deal.
Yeah.
So this is a little interesting. What kind of market is it? A hot market down there, or just?
It is. Huntsville's just a wonderful place. Even when the rest of the country was kind of slow, Huntsville was primarily a defense town. Probably 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when I was growing up, and has made a very smooth transition to being a technology-based. There was a couple of years there where it was touch and go as defense pulled back. There really wasn't anything to supplement that, but that entrepreneurial spirit just kicked in, and now we are one of the 5, this is always interesting to me, one of the 5 major biotech centers in the world. I think that's fascinating. I know that because my husband and I
would have no idea if you hadn't mentioned that.
No, poor old Huntsville, Alabama, a lot of tech companies, a lot of start companies. It's just an exciting place to live.
Well, the big 3 now, I mean, you got Silicon Valley, you have Boston, and you have the Washington, Northern Virginia area has now become very, very big in a high-tech
that's right.
But that's interesting. But, you see towns, Lowell, Massachusetts comes to mind where, as recently as 10 years ago, it looked like a neutron bomb went off, and they had all the old factories there and shoe factories, and now it's a major high-tech center. They've taken all these old buildings and done them over into Class A space. So
it is exciting. I mean, I love being here too. Huntsville's a wonderful place to work and just to raise a family and everything.
Yeah.
The only other thing I was going to mention about the builders is that South Trust is very committed to working out these forward commitments to builders, which is not something I had experience with before I came here, but it has been so fun to do, and boy, that really ties them to you.
Well, I think there is a change, and by the way, I do caution everybody when subjects like this come up, I don't want to get into any, proprietary areas of your company, and no problem talking about forwards, obviously, but, sometimes I don't want to get too deep. I just don't want to get too deep into like a special deal that only you have and stuff like that. But yes, in terms of forwards, and are you able to do any acquisition development loans or construction loans?
We do those, yes. But in our case, what we've tried to do is, and it's taken a lot of different forms. We may set aside a pool of money at a particular interest rate, maybe offer them a float down. We might do that for 6 months. We have gone to Fannie and Freddie and negotiated some special commitments for builders, with larger, that were purchasing larger commitments.
Do they have to buy them for coverage?
They do, and sometimes they don't. It really depends. That's pretty much rate driven. If they're wanting some negotiated commitments and they want 6 3/4 right now, well then yes.
Oh, well, of course.
Yeah.
But no, that's not what I'm talking about. Builders hate paying for forwards.
Right.
That's like, to them, it's like worse than getting a disease.
Right.
But interestingly enough, in the last 4 or 5 years, builders really haven't had to shell out a lot of money for forwards.
No, they have not. I mean, we're all going back to those old-fashioned things, the buy-downs and the forward commitments and all those things that we used to use to get business before. You're right.
Yeah. Well, you haven't been around long enough for some of the waves that I've been in over the past 25, 30 years, but let me tell you, when the worm turns and rates start heading up, it's the builders are all, they'll be on the phone the next day, and of course they're looking, not to put anything up front for forward.
Right. And really it just depends on the commitment itself. We've done it all. And the strength of the builder as well.
Mm-hmm. What do you find for those that would like to get out and work with builders, what advice would you have in terms of dealing with different types of personalities and site people? What kind of advice would you have for people out there?
For builders specifically?
For loan officers who would like to maybe get a piece of that pie out there. Because it is different than working with realtors.
It is. I guess I only know the way that I have done it. And I hate to keep using this same word.
Why?
But I try just to be a professional about it, a pleasant professional. But I just treat it as a business. I know that no matter how much they like me, this is their livelihood, and they need me to work very hard for them and to just follow through on everything that I say and not to overpromise and underdeliver. I try to be very careful no matter how great the tendency is to say, sure, I can do that, or yes, you're approved, or, I just try to be very careful. And it's not as quick. I don't think you get necessarily the quickest attention that way, but I think you last the longest that way.
Well, when to be specific, for example, when you're dealing with clientele coming from builders, I assume you get on their approved list, or you're their designated lender, one way or the other, and they probably throw a little money in the pot to get them to you, or to their people. When that happens, for example, are you taking loan apps face-to-face and then going into either a pre-qual or really a pre-approval up front for them?
Exactly. Yes, I do most
Pre-approval or
of my
pre-qual?
Pre-approval.
Right. Okay.
I do most of my appointments. I still like doing them face-to-face. I have a lot of friends that do it primarily over the telephone. I just like doing it face-to-face. I find that if I meet it myself, if I meet them, I sit down with them, I spend even an hour with them. I answer as many of their questions up front. I try to ask for every bit of documentation, everything that I need. I don't really ever have that much interaction with them again, and they are still happy. I have a wonderful processor. She and I have worked together for really since the day I started, and we just have a good system going. So if I spend a lot of time with them on the front end, then I'm pretty much done throughout the process. And we do have automated underwriting, so I issue a pre-approval letter. Of course, it's kind of vague, and it's always got the little outs, contingent upon obtaining verification of the information provided and an appraisal or whatever it is in their particular case. But yes, I do run them through immediately. If you don't have automated underwriting, I don't know how people do it.
Well, you don't today. You have to use an intermediary. Somehow you have to use LT, or you have to use one of them, because if not, you're really not in business today.
No.
No realtor will deal with anybody that can't do that. So that's kind of a given, I think, going into the equation today.
Right.
But it's so much different. As I say, I was talking to someone recently, and we were talking about the good old days, when it took literally almost 6 to 8 weeks, in some cases even longer, to get an actual approval.
Oh, and
it was insane.
Eventually we're going to do mortgage for everyone, and they will all use automated underwriting. And so when they come in, they'll know to expect it while they're sitting there, an approval or an indication. But still, in this day and age, the people that I get in, that I run through automated underwriting, they think I'm wonderful. They can't believe that they know so quickly. It is a wonderful tool.
Well, let me ask you about the flip side of the coin, something I really do not ask people, but just kind of came to mind here, and that is, how do you handle people that whose credit scores are coming in at 620 or whatever? What do you do with them?
Same thing. Well, of course, we have some alternate credit sources, too. We do some B and C lending that we broker out, and we will try those. FHA has been very lenient over the last year or so. Now I'm sure they're starting to tighten up. So we try all the programs that we can. But if I simply cannot help them, I tell them while they're in my office, up front, I tell them that I will work with them for as long as it takes to get them in a home. And I do. I have people I've worked with for probably 2 or 3 years.
Well, I just had a friend of mine whose wife had a lot of fun with credit cards, and his credit was pretty good, and unbeknownst to him, she was kind of trashing it and throwing them in drawers and whatever.
Right.
And so their credit score didn't come out well, and they just finished doing something with Greenpoint. But the whole game plan is to continue working with people, because a year from now, he'll refi out of the deal. He's going to sell his home for in the 700s, and he's buying a home at 360 and paying off all his debts. And so a year from now, he'll be a prime candidate to refinance if he's been treated right.
That's exactly right. And whoever took the time with him now is the one that he will go back to a year from now.
Well, I mean, it all, once again gets back into relationships and relationship building. Are there any other, we're kind of getting towards the end of this, but I do want to ask, are there any other things that you do for your past customers besides, I'm sure you send mailings out? And
John, I don't. That is my,
my
very weak area. I do not send mailings out. I don't give them closing gifts. That is my
take your money and run.
But I guess, Huntsville, for as many people as it has, it's probably 250,000. The people that I do business with and the loans that I do for people, a lot of them I know as well, and that's just through the years and children and sports and school and the whole thing, so that they end up coming back to me, or they'll try, if I've moved places, which I don't do very often, but if I have, they'll track me down. Even that has really not been a tremendous negative that I've noticed, but of course, I guess I don't know how much.
But you know what? I don't think, I'd have two things to say about that. One, I'm sure you are losing some business, but
sure.
Nonetheless, you're not going to the poorhouse either. But my second comment on that is that you live in a town that is such a size that it probably doesn't cost you too much by not doing it. Maybe you're losing 20-25% of stuff that you would get. But I would say that if you're in a much more
metropolitan,
yeah, right, you cannot do that.
Yeah.
At least if you want to go to the levels that you are.
Yeah.
If you want to stay at 15 million, have at it. But it's not going to happen.
Right. Oh, it's just a fascinating job. I love it. It's so fun. You meet new people all the time. It's technical enough to be challenging. It's always new, never boring. It is a fabulous vocation.
Yeah, and that's your point about it being fun. I just did an interview with someone, a fellow named Peter Cameron, who's a regional at BF Saul in Washington, in Reston, Virginia. And he really went on, rhapsodized almost, about the fact that it should be a fun business. And if it's not fun for you, and for some people out there who are listening to this, it isn't fun, for whatever reason, they've slotted themselves into the wrong business. They take rejection personally.
Right.
Whatever, probably 10 different reasons, but whatever it is, those people really ought to consider getting into a different line. And I'm not saying that to beat up on somebody that might be listening to this, but this job isn't for everybody.
No, it's not. You really have to have a certain tenacity to it. I have realtors. I don't think I've ever had a realtor that I've pursued that I haven't eventually gotten their business. But it has taken, in some cases, 4 or 5 years to get at their business. It's just that tenacity and that commitment to working that hard.
One of the saddest things I ever saw, I remember his first name, and his name was Tom, and I was a regional manager with a fairly large company, and I remember the high school that he went to, St. John's High in Washington, and brought him in, and in terms of looks, he was a gift from the gods. I swear to God, this guy worked out. When I would ask him, I'd say, well, what do you do? And we were chatting, a very personal fellow, and he said, well, I got a girlfriend, but I don't see her too much because I work out like 6 hours a day. And he ate, I'll never forget, he ate one meal a day, which was lunch. And he was a big carbo freak, and he had a body just chiseled like David, Michelangelo's David, and had the looks to match. And what he would do is he would go out to these, I went out one day with him, and he said, well, let's go over here. There's a Pizza Hut. And I said, well, no. He said, no, they have one of these all you can eat. And that's how he would do it. He would go in there, and he would eat them out of house and home. But that was his one meal every day. Then he'd go work out for 6 hours. And the shame of it was a very sad story, because he worked at this for like 9 or 10 months, got very discouraged, and he was doing okay, but not great, and he gave up. He just he couldn't take himself another 6 or 8 months to build a little bit firmer base, and
right.
Everybody talked to him. He absolutely could have done very well, and I relate this story because it was sad, and the fact that there's a lot of loan officers out there that are listening to you and other people, and that are new and have half a year in or a year in, and they're discouraged. But if you're good and if you're persistent, and you know your products and everything, you really have to have the faith, because it's a long-term haul.
It is. I'm going to say it took me a year and a half to get to the point that I was closing $1 million a month. And then incrementally, the changes from $1 million a month to $3 or $4 million a month, that was much faster. It takes a long time, or it took me a long time.
No, I think that's a normal pattern.
Establish that base.
Right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And you just have to have the persistence and put everything together. It really is sad when you see somebody who really can make it in the business. I'm sure you've run across a couple of them.
Oh, I've heard some of them.
Yeah, exactly. And they just, they really can do it. They just can't, stick it out. It's a long-term race in this business.
It is.
And I think on that point, I think we're going to end the interview because I think there's a message out there for people in terms of persistence and hanging tough and sticking it through. The old timers, I'm sure they're all shaking their heads saying, yeah, that's exactly what you got to do. But it's not something you can teach new people. They just have to, they have to get out there and do it on their own. But I want to thank you very much for taking the time, Sue, to talk with us. I am most anxious to come down there and watch one of your polo games, and we'll keep in touch.
Thank you, John.
Great. Thank you, Sue.
Bye-bye.